to the Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women, Tribal Governments Program, Purpose Area Number 5, CTAS webinar. My name is Christina, and I will be your moderator for today. Our presenter today is James Smith, and panelists today are Michael Sterling and Rebecca Jones. They are from the Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women. Go ahead, James.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We won't try to lecture to you too long today. It's more so making sure that you get a brief overview of what's involved, some changes that have taken place this year, but we really want to take the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. So don't be afraid to ask any questions. This is your opportunity. This is for you. And so we want you to take full advantage of it. We are here to answer whatever we can answer. And if we can't answer something on here, we will definitely get back to you. I won't insult you by reading the mission of OVW. You can all see that, but it's just very important. It's the crux of all of our work that we do. And so I just want to make sure that that's always a part of any presentation that we have. So just some kind of basic housekeeping key date kind of things to think about. The solicitation opened up on Wednesday, December 4th, and it is closing. Now, this is very important. It's closing on February 25th. At 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I cannot emphasize enough how important that date is. I would encourage you to set up Google alerts, Outlook alerts, whatever you need to do. Set it for a day in advance, the day of, and like a week out, and just to make sure that you have that on your calendar. Some other key dates. We know sometimes that, especially in the tribal community, sometimes there can be issues with getting traditional electronic applications in. Although we've never had it, we always provide this opportunity. So if by chance you need to request alternative means or get a paper application in, that needs to be done by January 24th of this year. Also for GMS, although you can register for it at any point, we all know that technology is both a blessing and a curse. Sometimes things that you can do very relatively quickly, you can encounter problems. So we like to encourage applicants at the very least to do it 2 weeks in advance. If you can do it now, today, this week, that would be better. But absolutely, I would encourage you to have it done by February 11th, just so you don't run into any of those types of problems. If you do encounter technical problems, it allows enough time for those things to be figured out. So it's kind of all about proper planning when you think about it. OVW funding for Indian tribes, tribal governments. So just to give you a sense of different types of funding and where, funding is combined and comes from, and some of our other programs that are listed here. I won't go through reading all of them, but if at any point anyone has any questions about more information on this, you can reach out to me and I can get you all the information you need to know or put you in touch with someone for each one of these programs. The OVW Tribal Affairs Division, we're made up of, let's see, how many of us now? We have grown. There's Tia Farmer, there's Rebecca Jones, there's Darla Nolan, our fearless leader, Sherry Ann Moore. We have Jessica Neal, who just joined us. Some of you guys may remember Jessica. She was in a different capacity with us, but now she is an official federal employee, a grant program manager. We also have Mary and we have Chris. They assist and support us. So our division has grown a little bit in the last couple months. So we're super excited about that. But any of the folks that I just named, in addition to myself, can help you out with things or kind of get you pointed in the right direction. But just kind of think of the Tribal Affairs Division as kind of the main source for all of OVW's tribal specific grant programs. Although, as I mentioned earlier, we do have other divisions and units that have programs where tribes can apply to. Our programs are solely for tribes and to focus on your needs and your community's needs as well. In terms of thinking about the tribal governments program and CTAS for this year, oftentimes you'll look at the solicitation and you'll see that some of what can be requested and done under some purpose areas or programs are very similar. And we don't ever want to discourage you from applying, but I want to read this because a lot of times we run into this. So I just want to make sure that you guys are understanding this to better position you when you're applying for funding. OVW encourages tribes to apply for tribal governments program funding to improve the criminal justice system response to violence against women, including supporting law enforcement, prosecution, courts, multidisciplinary teams. Although tribes may continue to apply for tribal government's funding for victim services, funding will also be available from OVC in FY20 under a standalone solicitation for comprehensive victim services for projects focused on improving services for victims of crime. So again, we're not trying to discourage you, but when you're thinking about it, I would, if I were you, if it were me applying to this, I would definitely focus on all the things that the tribal government's funding can be used for. And if it's something else that another purpose area can cover, I would probably focus more of my request in that purpose area so that you can maximize what you're getting from OVW, and you can maximize the funding that you're getting from DOJ as a whole. Certainly, if there's ever any questions about this, a little bit more about what we mean, we can talk through this. But again, we're just stating this to just better position you, because we often see a lot of requests for just a lot of victim services stuff. And so we feel like sometimes tribes are missing out on all the other things that they can do with our funding that they can't do with other program offices. And actually, I'm going to defer to my colleague for 1 second. I know Rebecca is also very passionate about this, just like I am. Rebecca, is there anything I may have forgotten or that you want to add on this piece? I'm going to take that as a no, and I'm going to move forward.
Okay, so this is an important piece right here. You will notice under a lot of the OVC funding that you would not be able to fund law enforcement positions or dedicated prosecutor positions, things to do with courts or betters intervention. Those types of activities would be unallowable under OVC funding for the most part. That is not, it is allowable under the tribal government's program. And another thing that we can include in tribal government's program projects is prevention activities. And that, again, that would be, for the most part, is unallowable under the OVC funding, the VOCA funding. So if you try to compare and contrast the things that you could cover over here under OVW that you can't cover under OVC, and then try to, make the puzzle pieces fit together to best support your community's efforts toward ending these types of crimes in your community. That's the advice for this part here.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I just want to back up 1 second. I know that I had the mission of OVW up when we first started, and I just want to point out something that's sometimes a little confusing to tribal government grantees. So OVW has 4 crimes that we focus on, and all of our funding kind of focuses on, and that is domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. But I want you guys to think in terms of tribal governments, it's kind of 5. And so the 5th one under tribal governments would be sex trafficking. So just want to make sure that you guys are fully aware of that. And it's all throughout the solicitation, but I just like to reiterate it as well. And thank you, Rebecca. Something that it was new last year, and because it was new last year and it wasn't in previous years, I thought it was important to highlight this again. So in past years, we had a budget requirement for training and technical assistance in traveling, where it was $25,000 for Alaska, for tribes in Alaska, and for the lower 48 non-Alaska tribes, we had it be $20,000. So last year we increased that. So for the lower 48 non-Alaskan tribes, that is going to be $30,000 again this year, and for Alaska tribes, it needs to be $35,000. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we delve into the budget section, but just know that this is a requirement that has to be in your application and in your budget, and it's laid out clearly in the solicitation as well. But like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We do have some required trainings that have to fall into that category as well. You can certainly have more than the $35,000 or the $30,000, and you can have more travel and training in there, but we definitely have to see these 3 events in there. New grantee orientation, which everyone has to attend whenever you get a new award. I know that some of you are current grantees and you may have attended a new grantee orientation for your current award, but it's not, you have to attend for each new award that you get. And the solicitation often changes each year, and so we're covering things that may not have been covered in your previous new grantee orientation. We are also happy to report that we are going on our next annual Tribal Summit. We started it a few years ago, and it's just grown every year. It's a great opportunity for you all to participate in. We focus on best practices. We have some of the best presenting and providing resources to you out there, and so we make that a requirement as well. It usually falls around second to last week in September. And so ideally, most of you, if you finish your awards in 3 years or 4 years, you'll go, 3 to 4 times maybe, but it's definitely a requirement. And like I said, there's more about that in the solicitation as well. And then we also have our biennial sex conference, which is coming up next week, which we're super excited about. We did the first one 2 years ago, and my colleague Rebecca Jones heads that up, and she always does an amazing job. But this is kind of another opportunity where we're kind of providing in-house training technical assistance to you. We're convening the field and the best of the best to make sure that you get educated in these kind of areas that'll help you with what you're trying to do in your communities. So some other things that are new for tribal governments this year. So applicants that received the three-year awards under the OVW Tribal Governments Program in FY 2018 and FY 19 are not eligible to apply for new or continuation funding with regard to their FY 2018 or 19 awards. This eligibility requirement extends to entities authorized to apply on behalf of tribes. And in addition, if a tribe has an award from FY 18 or FY 19, it may not apply through a designee in FY 20. And I know that was a lot, and I certainly want questions on that, but just making sure that I give you the exact language. Normally, I would not like to have this much verbiage, but I thought it was important for you guys to see exactly what it was, and we'll talk about it. I also want to read this. Applicants with the OVW Tribal Governments Program Awards from FY 17 or earlier generally are eligible to apply for funding in FY 20. However, if the applicant has a substantial amount of unobligated funds, 50% or more funds remaining in the FY 2017 or earlier award as of March 31st, 2020 without adequate justification as determined by OVW, it may not be considered for funding or may receive a reduced award amount if selected for funding in FY 20. Awards under this program for FY 20 will be made up for up to $900,000 for the entire 36 months. What we're doing new this year is at the end of that 36-month award period, grantees may be eligible to receive 24 months of additional non-competitive funding up to $600,000 to continue their projects. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. I want to be clear that it's not guaranteed. We will be checking in on like a halfway point for for anyone who gets awarded in 20. So once you get your award, we'll check in maybe like a year and a half, 18 months out to see how you're doing. And then of course, we'll be looking as it gets really close to the end of your 3 years to see where you are. If you're doing well, and while I can't promise anything, but if you're doing well and it makes sense at the time and you apply, I can't see any reason that you probably wouldn't get it, although I can't guarantee it if everything is going well. But I would encourage you to make sure that you are spending your money down. If you're having a hard time figuring that out or need some assistance, to reach out to any of your grant program managers at OVW. We are happy to sit down with you and figure that out, and also have a TA provider joining on the call with us or a session with us to work that out. Last year, we had some good applications where we had to turn a few down. It's not because the applications weren't good. It's just, if someone has $700,000 on a current award, and at the time that they apply for this new funding, they still have like $500,000 or $600,000 of that left, there's no way we can justify giving you another award for that amount. We want to make sure that we position you in a way that you look good, that you're able to spend the money down, and just constantly stacking awards on you isn't fair to you either. There's more pressure added to you with the more money you get. So just make sure that if you get awarded, you're working with your program specialist, you're working with TA providers all throughout the life of your award, especially in the first 36 months, so we can make sure that you're at an acceptable level. Certainly, it would be great if you had all the money spent, but we know that things happen. So we expect sometimes to see a little bit. We just get concerned when it's like almost like you didn't touch the award, or it's almost like half of the award is when the concerns kind of jump. And so we had to kind of figure out a way to work that. But we're hoping too that this new project period that we're doing with the additional 24 months is a way to kind of curb some of that and to help you guys out. Certainly write down any questions that you have for that. We'll have question opportunity in a little bit, but I know that was a lot, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw that. So for FY20, OVW priority area. Every year, the director of our office has some kind of priorities that he or she wants to lay out for the office, and we try to tie those into each one of our individual programs. So I'll just very quickly read those to you so you kind of know what the focus is. And underneath for the first one, we kind of gave a little bit of an example. I won't read the example, but I encourage you to read that just to lay that out and make that hit home a little bit more for you. But the OVW priority areas as set by our director for FY20 will be reduce violent crime against women and promote victim safety through investing in law enforcement and increasing prosecution, empower victims to become survivors by growing them past their vulnerabilities to a place of self-sufficiency, and the increased efforts to combat stalking. And what I want to say about the last one, we all know that we're in a world and are in an age where technology is fastly growing and has growing. So when we say stalking, we want you to know that that also includes cyber stalking. We realize, where we are in the world right now, so that is certainly included, even though we don't say it expressly here. It is certainly included, and we expect to see some of that. And just also that, applications proposing activities in any of these areas will be given priority and funding decisions as we're reviewing internally to kind of decide, who we're going to fund and not fund. But I encourage you to flag this page and refer back to it as you're, as you're working on your application and drafting your narratives. And then also when you're doing that kind of final check once you have things written, just to make sure you've covered yourself in every way possible. Eligibility. You have to be a federally recognized tribe or organization that is acting as an authorized designee of a federally recognized Indian tribe in order to apply. New applicants must have never before received funding from OVW or whose last award from OVW closed on or before September 30th of 2019 are eligible to request up to $900,000. Current applicants who currently have an open, active award from the Tribal Governments Program are eligible to request up to $900,000 too. So we kind of, what's a little different than what we did in past years, we kind of had the 459 and 900,000. But given that we're moving towards a new project period and we understand how important it is sometimes and that the field often needs a lot of money to get the work done, we kind of remove that restriction to kind of put everybody on an even playing field with the amount that they can ask for. Right now, we're looking at that amount to be about $900,000, but anything could change, but that's what I would work off of right now. Also, a federally recognized tribe or an organization that is acting as an authorized designee of a federally recognized Indian tribe may apply. If the applicant is a tribal designee under the OVW Tribal Governments Program, you must include a tribal resolution or an equivalent document. I want to restate that because I know ever since CTAS existence, it's always been something that's required and you have to submit it. This year, we're only doing it if you are, it only ever really, so OVW and OVC require the tribal resolution for designees. We're the only two offices that do designees, but I know that some of you are probably applying to our funding and other offices. Just know that you're really only submitting this for us or OVC if you're applying as a tribal designee. If you decide not to apply for tribal governments or OVC, which I hope that you do, but by the chance that you don't and you do other purpose areas, you won't need to worry about that. a new thing this year as we tried to reduce the burden on the amount of paperwork and things that you all have to do when you're submitting your applications. For authorized designees, I won't read through all of this, but I encourage you to pay attention to this. Please make sure it's current. Please, at all possible, make sure that it is due by the due date. Make sure that it clearly demonstrates that you are authorized to apply on behalf of the tribe. And just make sure that it states this current year, that it is signed by the appropriate officials, that it's dated appropriately. A lot of times we'll get in resolutions and we have to go back to the applicant because either it's not signed or they submitted one from a previous year where it's dated for another year and it's not covering them for this award period. So certainly just make sure you do that. If you need any examples, feel free to reach out to me directly or tribalgrants@usdoj.gov or my personal work email, and I can make sure that you get an example. If for some reason you're new to applying and you've never seen this before, we can make sure that you get the resources that you need on that. But this is an important document, and if you do manage to get awarded and we still don't have this, your funds will be frozen until we get it. And we certainly don't want anything that would delay that. So, just keep that in mind. How can funding be used? So we kind of have a variety of things that funding can be used for in the tribal governments program. It's very broad, but we do, have about 8 or 9 things that, we try to hone in on based on our statutory language. So I'm going to quickly breeze through these. You can read them in more detail, but just to kind of give you an idea. And then there'll be a chart later on that breaks that down a little bit more for you. But I'll say to develop and enhance effective plans for tribal government to reduce violent crimes against Indian women and increase their safety. To increase the ability of the tribal government to respond to, and I'll just continue to say 5 crimes so that I don't have to keep repeating that language, but just know when I say 5 crimes, I'm referring to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and sex trafficking. Next, to strengthen the tribal criminal justice system's ability to get involved with stopping violence against Indian women. To improve services that are available to help victims of the 5 crimes. To work with the community, create education and prevention campaigns that are designed to inform members of the community about the 5 crimes, and that also increase the community's awareness about the needs of children who have witnessed domestic violence. I want to spend just a quick second on this one. I really encourage, as you're thinking about whether or not you're going to apply and you're going to submit your application, really look at your community and the problems that you're having and see what you can do in this area. Sometimes I don't feel like we see enough in this area, and we can certainly work with you on how that could, well, to a certain degree. I can't read your application, but I can kind of tell you things that folks may have done in the past or refer you to our website where we have a previous application where some folks have addressed this particular project area. But I encourage you to to think about that as you're working on your application. To provide supervised visitation and safe exchange programs, i.e. a visitation center that allows children to visit their non-custodial parent in cases where one parent has committed an act of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking against the other. Also, to provide transitional housing assistance to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, and stalking. I ask you to really think about transitional housing too if you are going to apply to that. We have a TA provider by the name of Redland Consulting that specializes in transitional housing, and the executive director is Vicki Avantes, and she is willing and able to talk with you even though you may not be a current OVW grantee. She can kind of talk to you a little ways about putting your application together in that regard. Sometimes we get applications where the applicant is saying transitional housing, but it's a little different, and we just want to make sure that you're getting the best information to prepare yourself when submitting this. Also, to provide legal advice and representation to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, and stalking who need assistance with legal issues that are caused by abuse that they have suffered. I will say something about this as well. If you know that this is what you want to do, even though it's listed here as something that you can do, you need to explicitly say that in your application so that if you are awarded, we can make sure that that special condition is added, and all of those things. A lot of times I'll have grantees that want to use this, and it wasn't something that they initially said that they were going to do, and it wasn't in their application. Yes, there's things that we can do on the back end, but we often see this one as being a big one. So as you're putting together your application, I ask you to really look back at all of these and make sure that, you are really looking at what you can do and what you would like to do, so you can kind of have those things up front. Although I know sometimes things change as the years go by, but just take a really good look at these. To provide services to address the needs of youth who are victims of the 5 crimes and the needs of children and youth exposed to the 5 crimes, including support for the non-abusing parent or caretaker of the youth or child. This is something we're trying to do more and more with. So I would ask you to look at this one too. And then the same TA provider that I mentioned could talk to you a little bit about this one as well. Also, to develop and promote legislation and policies that enhance best practices for responding to violent crimes against Indian women, including the 5 crimes that I've mentioned. I would also just remind you, please contact us if you have any questions about whether or not a specific activity is allowable before submitting your application. Certainly, we'll work with you if something isn't allowable, but it's always good to kind of ask those questions up front. We do have a lot of things laid out in the solicitation, but the list is not meant to be all encompassing. Sometimes new things pop up, new technologies pop up, new services pop up that maybe we haven't heard of before. And so, we want to make sure that we're working with you on that. So we are definitely here to answer any of those types of questions too as you're preparing your application. So as I mentioned a little while ago, there was going to be like a little graphic or graph that kind of just broke down maybe some of the things that you could use funding for. My colleague Rebecca Jones mentioned earlier a batterers intervention program, or as we refer to it as a BIP, is certainly something you can do under the tribal government's program. Transitional housing, supervised visitation, children and youth, coordinated community response, CCR. I want to emphasize hiring law enforcement, judges and prosecutors and etc. A lot of times folks just think, oh, cops is that purpose area for cops, and it is, and that's not to discourage you from applying to them, but also know that you can also get an officer under us or law enforcement under us, and we encourage you to strongly look at that and make those requests as you see fit. We would love to see the amount of requests that we get for law enforcement go up, especially because we know that that is so needed in Indian country. OVW anticipates approximately 55 awards, up to a maximum of $900,000 per award. Applicants should consider the level of effort and funding necessary to complete the project during the 36-month budget cycle, and not solely the amount that was previously awarded in deciding how much to request. And I would encourage you to really think about that. Sometimes applicants say, well, we request $700,000 last time, let's just do that again. But if you're in a situation where you really ended up not needing that amount, you could fall into a situation where you have these huge balances that could prevent you from getting awarded in future years. So we don't want to do that. Just, while we don't want to tell you what to apply for, I would just strongly encourage you to just, really take a need at what's needed in your community. Look at some of your past awards and kind of work with your if you have finance folks and budget folks and your leadership to kind of see, okay, what would be the correct amount based on what we're trying to do, so that, you can just make sure that the amount, that you're requesting is really feasible in terms of what you're trying to do. The amount of awards is certainly an estimate. There's no way to say for sure how many awards we're going to make. It's a lot of factors: how many applications we get, how good the applications are, some other external and internal factors. So we just put that as an estimate to kind of give you an idea, but any of that could change. Other requirements and things to think about as you're submitting your applications and things that we would require from you: confidentiality, collaborative partnership is required. There's a section in the solicitation that talks explicitly about that requirement, and I will just spend a few minutes on just kind of letting you know what that is. Applications for this purpose area must demonstrate that the proposal was developed in consultation with a qualified partner. For the purposes of the solicitation, a qualified partner can be considered a nonprofit, non-governmental Indian victim services provider organization, such as a domestic violence shelter program or a rape crisis center, a nonprofit or non-governmental tribal domestic violence or sexual assault coalition, or an advisory committee that includes women from the community to be served by this project. So you kind of have a couple of different things to choose from. And like I said, there's more information on page 25 of the solicitation for that, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that that's a requirement. We take victim safety and offender accountability very important, so make sure you read the section on there. There's travel budget requirements, and we kind of covered those up early when I listed the required travels, and then I kind of listed the amounts for the lower 48 and for Alaska. I will also just throw this out there, even though it's not listed as a requirement in the solicitation, if anyone on the phone is from Alaska and you do get awarded, you can almost guarantee that in addition to the required trainings that I mentioned earlier, you will be required to go to what we're calling an Alaska implementation workshop, which we've done for the last 3 years. And it's just really to help our tribes in Alaska with their projects and get a good start in implementing their projects. And then we kind of do it every year to check in and make sure that you're getting the support that you need. So just kind of plan for that. We normally do that. And Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's usually Anchorage, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's been in Anchorage for the last 3 years.
Yeah. And Rebecca, is there anything you want to say about that? I know you've gone a couple years. Is there anything that I left out about that, or you think we're good on that?
Nope, you covered it.
Okay. Legal assistance certification requirement, that'll be important to turn in. And then your letter of non-supplanting. All of these things have detailed paragraphs or a paragraph dedicated to them in the solicitation that gives you more information. And it should be very clear, but by chance, if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out. I know we typically have a lot of folks that have applied before, so you've done this. So, but just know that the information is there if you need it. At this point, we're going to talk a little bit about budget items. I put these bullets in as kind of top things that kind of pop up. I am going to ask my colleague, Michael, to assist me in this and just kind of, Michael, first of all, whatever you want to share or what you think applicants need to know, because I know you're always reviewing the budgets, in addition to kind of some of these bullets that I put here just to kind of as talking points to get the conversation started. But I'll turn it over to you if it's all right for you to talk a little bit about these things, and I'll jump in, and I know Rebecca will if we need to.
Yes, so these points are the main important parts of your budget. One thing also you want to make sure, first with the travel, now you don't have to do a cost breakdown of the OVW travel. You would just need to indicate, like James said earlier, the 3 required travels and then totaling the required amount. In addition, when you do submit, if you do have an indirect cost rate agreement, please include a copy of the agreement in the application. A lot of times when we're reviewing the budgets, we are going to follow up with the applicant for a copy of the indirect cost rate agreement. In addition to that, make sure everything is broken down to the point of at least a brief narrative of the reasoning for these items that you're included, as well as a computation. A lot of times we can't, outside of the travel, the OVW mandated travel, everything else we can't approve, or we would need further clarification if it's a lump sum. So we would just need to know exactly how the organization came about to the amount that they came to. In addition, of course, your cost has to be reasonable, has to be adequate, has to be related to the program. And during our review of the budget, we usually go through items. If we see something that does look, that we may question, we are going to follow up with the applicant to provide more additional information on the reasoning for these items, as well as we will follow up with the program manager just to make sure that it's related to the program. Always make sure that it's, when you are creating the budget, that the items that you include are related to the program, connected, to the project narrative. In addition to that, I think with these type of budgets, it is broken down in the Excel template, which makes it a lot easier, but I would still also recommend that you utilize the narrative portion of it and provide just additional information. Because a lot of times we do go back because it's just either too vague or it's just not enough information, or it's just a lump sum that we need more cost breakdown. And yeah, in relation to the budget, those are the key things that we've seen in the past. Usually that gets us having to reach back out with the applicants. So I'll give it back over to James.
Thank you, Michael. One other thing I wanted to say, in CTAS, I want to say last year, the year before last, we put a required field in there where you have to put a budget POC. So the person, it's typically either the person that did the budget or the person who's going to be responsible for the budget. Either way, we need that information. So while we're reviewing your application, if we have questions about the budget, we have a dedicated person to reach out to who knows this budget in and out, who can turn things around quickly for both you and us. So that's very important. We know sometimes you could have one person as that budget POC, and by the time you either find out that you're awarded, or a month or two after turning it in, sometimes that person's changed. We would like for you to reach out to us just to let us know. And that's true for us and any other office program funding you may be applying to. It's always good to inform us of who the new POC will be, so that we can make sure that we're able to get in touch with you all if we have any questions about any portion of your application. I think Michael touched on this too, but definitely just making sure that your numbers add up correctly. That's very important. I would also say, if I see, and this is just a off the wall example, but if I see $20,000 worth of computers in your budget, I expect to see something about that in your project narrative as well. Like your project narrative, your budget narrative, and your budget, they all need to be in sync with each other and making a lot of sense often. And then there's times where we'll see things that are in the narrative, the application narrative, that you need or you want, but there's no mention of it in the budget. So, either way, just make sure that you're sitting down and looking at those things. One other thing that I want to mention that's new this year, in the past, the templates have kind of been, we strongly encourage you to use them, but if you use your own format, just make sure that you answer all the questions that we're asking in the template that we provide. So this year, because we streamlined the solicitation down a lot, we tried to work all the templates in a way that if you just use what we provided, we would have all the information that we gave. So all the templates this year for all of the offices across the board are required. So just make sure that you use this Word document once you download it, save it to your computer, that you use that to do your narrative. I would strongly encourage you to do that. We cut the amount of questions down this year. Here's some other additional resources. You can find the frequently asked questions for CTAS here. There's kind of general frequently asked questions, and then there's frequently asked questions for almost every office. We do periodically update these, so if you notice that something is inaccurate, please reach out to us. We try to do it as quickly as we can. Again, the purpose area 5, tribal government's narrative, sample templates for the solicitation for other things that you might need. And then here's a link for OVW kind of resources and things to think about as you're doing your application. I will also say, well, I'll finish out by saying this and then I'll go into some other things. Here's some program contact information if you do have questions. Certainly, I don't mind any of you reaching out to me directly. My email address is james.smith12, that's james.smith12@usdoj.gov. If you email the tribal grants, it will get to me very fast. So whatever you want to do, I am fine with that. I think some things I would say before I jump into questions. Well, you know what? Let's just move into questions and then I'll go into the other things, because I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask anything that you would like to ask.
Great. Thank you, James. And James, we do have our first questions. The
Sure.
first two questions are regarding the travel and the travel budget. The first
Okay.
one is if you apply for two purpose areas, do you allocate $30,000 or $60,000 to that travel?
So I'll answer the first question. So that travel requirement in terms of the lower 48 and Alaska that I gave only applies to OVW Tribal Governments Program, which is Purpose Area 5 under CTAS. None of the other purpose areas have that specified amount. So that is solely if you're applying for the Tribal Governments Program underneath of CTAS.
Great, thank you, James. And the required travel refers to a sex trafficking conference, and it is described as being both biennial and biannual. How many events is this meant to represent during the 3 years?
If it's listed someplace as biannual, if that person could reach out to me and let me know where you saw that, I can get that taken care of. But it's I am fairly confident it's biennial, but Rebecca, if I am wrong, please correct me or maybe shed a little bit more light on that.
It's biennial. We expect it to happen every other year.
And was there another part to that question, or was that just getting clarity on that? I didn't.
That was just getting clarity on the biennial versus biannual.
Okay.
Our next question, they're looking for more explanation on the following language that was listed in the OVW Tribal Sexual Assault Services FOA. They have not seen it listed in CTAS or other OVW FOAs, and what they're looking to discuss is it's listed as, note, OVW will not fund the same entity as either a lead recipient or partner subrecipient on more than 2 discretionary awards in fiscal year 2020.
Christina, I'm sorry, I was trying to get you before you. So that language is no longer valid or relevant. It has been stripped from all OVW solicitations. So the person is probably looking at an earlier version, and it also doesn't sound like they were referencing the tribal government solicitation under CTAS, but I will just answer that question as a whole. No current OVW solicitation has that language anymore. I believe the person is looking at a previous version. We removed that shortly, like over the holidays. It does not exist. It is not in our solicitations anymore.
You can find the updated solicitation on our OVW website.
Thank you, James and Rebecca. And another question is, what is a tribal designee?
So essentially a tribal designee is an entity that's applying on behalf of the tribe, and you have the tribe's permission. And there's official paperwork that goes along with that. And part of that official paperwork is the tribal resolution that we ask for. So sometimes entities feel like they can represent the tribe a little better, or both the tribe and the entity feel like maybe it's better if you apply on our behalf. It's done for various reasons, but that's essentially, what it is.
Thank you, James. And the next question is about tribal consortia, and that is, can tribal consortia apply for purpose area number 5 funding? What is a consortium, and do they need tribal resolutions authorizing the application? And can the consortia apply for purpose area 5 funding at the same time? Or can the tribe and the consortium apply?
A consortium or consortia is basically 2 or more tribes, and an application is being submitted on 2 or more tribes, not just like a single tribe applying. That wouldn't be in consortia. It has to be 2 or more tribes, and there's one application representing kind of these tribes. Yes, absolutely, you can apply to Purpose Area 5 tribal governments. That is also true of all the other 7 purpose areas in CTAS this year. You can be a consortium and apply for that. And what was the resolution is required for the consortia as well. Sorry. That is only, and the only reason why that is because you're applying on behalf of more than just one tribe. So we need that document. So I correct what I said earlier. I left it out. For both designees and consortiums, a resolution is needed. But what's needed in that resolution still lays true as to everything that's laid out in the solicitation. I feel like there's a part of that question I may not have answered, or maybe I did cover it all.
It looks like the last part of the question is asking if there's a tribal consortia applying for Purpose Area 5 funding, can the tribes also apply for Purpose Area funding at the same time?
Let me get back. There's something I want to check with someone on that before I say an answer, but I promise to get back to whoever answered that question. As a matter of fact, if whoever asked that question, if you can, I'm sure you can hear me, shoot me an email as soon as you possibly can, and I promise to get you a definite answer today or tomorrow. My email is james.smith12@usdoj.gov. In Fox Valley, would you be able to type that in so they can see that as well?
You bet. Thank you, James.
Mm-hmm.
And can you please repeat the name that was mentioned earlier on the information for transitional housing?
Oh, so I mentioned Redwind Consulting. That's our TA provider that works with our grantees under tribal governments that are doing transitional housing. But they can also talk to you even if you're not a grantee and you're thinking about applying, to kind of, talk to you about some things like what we look for, like what's expected, what transitional housing is. And that is Redwind Consulting. If that person wants to, who's ever asking that question, if they also want to email me, I can do an introductory email between that applicant and Redwind so they can get what they need in case they would like to talk to them.
Excellent. Thank you, James. And another question is, with hiring a law enforcement officer, they would have other duties besides the priorities listed in the solicitation. Would the officer need to track their time separately for those activities?
So it's always good to track your time, but that officer that we're paying for, and you're using your OVW funding for, should only be working on stuff for your OVW program and stuff that's related to what's allowable for us and our 5 crimes. However, that doesn't mean that I'll just use this for an example. Say you hire Mark as your law enforcement officer, right? And Mark is doing 75% of work for your OVW award and, under our crimes and under what's allowable, but they're doing 25%, let's say, of cop stuff or OVW or OVC stuff. You just need to make sure that in your budget, they are listed as 75% for us and what that equates to. And then when you're tracking your time and doing your internal systems and their timesheets, it needs to be reflected on that as well. So we're not saying that they can't do other duties. We just don't pay for those other duties. The other part of their job that's not related to what they're doing for us needs to be paid for by that other office. Hopefully that makes sense.
And can I add to that as well? Just something to think about in a sense of when you're tracking or whoever's tracking their time, to ensure that they're checking their actual time. Of course, what you charge to the OVW grant will be the actual time charged. So I just want as you're creating the budget, also think of that. I know the budget is going to be an estimate, but also think if it's an estimate, try to get it as close as possible that you think they're going to be working. Because a lot of times things change or made, like how James said, if we're looking at one budget, a lot of times us at the financial side, if you're applying to multiple purpose areas, we sometimes look at the other purpose areas to see if that position is there on those other budgets to make sure that they're not going over like a full time, just to make sure everything is in order.
Great. Thank you, Michael and James. And can law enforcement be unsworn officers, for example, tribal security?
I need to check on that as well. If that person could also email me, because sometimes it gets a little gray in the areas of law enforcement, but I want to make sure that I get a clear answer before you sit down and write your application. I'm fairly certain I can get that to you today or tomorrow. So I would ask that person to send me that exact question too. I just don't want to forget. I'm jotting it down, but the day can get crazy sometimes, so I don't want to forget to be able to answer that.
Thank you, James. And for required travel costs, is there a location that they will be held at so that we can calculate those costs?
I don't know that well in advance enough to be able to say that. it's better maybe to estimate on the higher side than the lower side. So if we go somewhere where it's much lower than your estimate, then that's good versus you not estimating enough. But we just don't know that far in advance where they're going to be in order to give you the locations, honestly.
And I could provide additional on that. You can use, like, Washington D.C. is usually one of the highest ones. So you can use Washington D.C. But like I said earlier, for the OVW mandated travel, so the required OVW travel, you don't have to provide a cost breakdown for that. But if you do include it, you can use Washington D.C. as the location. That's usually when we're at least from the financial side, when we look at it, we're fine with Washington D.C. because, like James said, it's usually a higher per diem, so you'll be covered.
Great, thank you, Michael and James. And what is a statutory project area? Is that simply purpose area 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc.?
No, so just to clarify what that is, we used to call each one of the things that I read that you're able to do under the tribal governments program, we used to call that a purpose area. And that became very confusing because each one of the offices' programs in CTAS is also called a purpose area. So our way of addressing that this year was calling each one of the activities and kind of services that you can do under the tribal governments program. We listed those as our statutory project areas, because if you were to refer back to the statute that Congress has that created the tribal governments program, it explicitly lists what those things are, and we have them listed verbatim in the solicitation the same way that they're mentioned in the statute. So it's kind of sets the parameters for what the tribal governments program is about and what funding can be used for. So that's why we refer to them as our statutory project areas.
Thank you, James. And where do we list the budget POC name?
In the template that's in GMS for you, whichever purpose area you're applying for, but for the sake of this, it's going to be purpose area 5. When you go to that tab to fill in the budget information for purpose area 5 or any purpose area really, it's going to be at the top when you first start. In that particular tab, it's going to have where you would put the contact information, and I believe it's name, email address, and phone number. And so we just need to make sure that we have full names. If a person has a name that could be either sex, we ask you to please put Mr. or Mrs. in front so we will know and that we don't accidentally offend the person. Please make sure that the phone numbers are accurate. And if you can list office and cell, that would be great, and definitely include an email. This is just so we have every way possible to reach out, because a lot of times we often have questions when we're doing the budget, and we don't want your application review process to be held up because we can't get in touch with someone.
Thank you, James. And we have a follow-up from the statutory area question. That is, is the list of those areas?
Are they asking where is the list?
Yep, where is that listed?
Okay, they can find it on, give me 1 second, I'll tell you the exact page. That list, it starts on page 21 of the solicitation, right under the gray text bar that says number 5, Tribal Governments Program TGP, Office on Violence Against Women. It lists that note, and then directly under there, you'll see statutory project areas starting on page 21, and it continues over to page 22 of the solicitation. That's like one of the very first things under the OVW section. You will not miss it.
Great, thank you, James. And we have a follow-up to the budget question, and the follow-up is asking if that is on the demo form tab, the POC.
To my knowledge, it should be as how I described it. When you go into the whichever tab, because each office or purpose area has a tab. When you click on the tab for whatever purpose area you're applying to put in the budget figures, at the very top of that, there is a space for a budget POC.
Great, thank you, James. Under the BIP potential for this grant, would this only apply to victims, or does it apply to both victims and the batterers? Their understanding was it only applies to victims.
Oh, regarding batterers intervention program? Is that what
Yes.
you're talking about? I'm assuming.
Yep.
It would be victims.
Tribal government's program funding can be used to support batterers intervention programming. So you can use funds to run a batterers intervention group, which addresses the it does have to be court sanctioned, and the court has to have some type of sanctions for individuals that are not complying with the requirements for the batterers intervention program. But you can use tribal government's funding to support a batterers intervention group.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca and James. Can you provide some examples of the use for the half law enforcement public safety officer, and in what capacity can they be employed?
Oh, so are they I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. Are they asking, like, if they, in the example that I gave where someone was asking if they hired law enforcement, could the person do other duties? Are they asking, like, what kinds of, like, can they split their time between projects, and what kinds of things would they be doing? I'm just trying to make sure, and maybe I'm just not thinking about it correctly, Rebecca or Michael. If I'm not, let me, brain's a little overwired today, but I'm trying to make sure before I answer that, I understand what they're asking.
I think it is similar to what you were saying, talking about earlier. So what we would see frequently under this type of situation would be this law enforcement or public safety officer would be employed part-time, dedicated to our specific 5 crimes. So we might see a domestic violence and sexual assault investigator, and then have some prevention responsibilities within the community. But then the other part of their time, then they could be paid for with other funds, not OVW funds, could be doing other things within the community. So doing patrols, just normal patrols, or responding to other types of crimes, that type of thing. But they would have to be specifically dedicated to our 5 crimes, at least a portion of their time that they're working. And if you have a follow-up question to that, just type it in the chat box.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And another question is, if we apply for transitional housing, does the tribe have to already own the building?
No, you don't have to already own it.
Thank you, James. When is the pre-award risk assessment submitted?
You submit that with your application. That is part of the attachments for your application materials, and it's extremely important that you submit that, because we will keep asking you for it, and it will delay review on your budget until we get it. It is a requirement. It must be done. Treat it just like your budget or your purpose area narrative. It needs to be answered.
Can I add to that as well, James?
Yeah.
The pre-award risk assessment, in addition, we review at the Grants Financial Management Division, or GFMD, you may hear. Like James said, it is very important that you also read every single question, because each question has multiple parts, and we need a response to each of the questions. Same thing with the summary data sheet. We do review the summary data sheet. If there is something missing, every single question, every part of it, even if you put an N, if it doesn't apply to you, just put NA, but you had to respond to every question, because if we do not see a response, we will have to follow back up with you, and that will delay the review process. So just make sure you read it, and if you have any questions, like I said, just follow up with James, and they'll forward it over to the GFMD help desk, and we can assist in regards to of any questions you have of the pre-award risk assessment. But again, I have to reiterate this. Please read and respond to every single question, because we've gotten them every year. We have to go back, and it delays the review process, and that delays your application.
And just to add to that, just to make sure, in case anyone's confused about where to find it, if you go to the Tribal Safety and Justice website, it's listed under miscellaneous documents on the FY20 CTAS page. It's there. It's in the GMS applicant page, where all the documents you would actually use to submit your application. It's there. It's also attached to this webinar. So that's 3 places where you can find those questions. And if you have trouble finding them in any of those places, you can always email tribalgrants@usdoj.gov, or you can email me directly, and I can make sure that you get it.
Great. Thank you, James and Michael. And if we are in our last year of our current OVW grant, the extension ends on September 31st of this year, are we in position to write an extension for the $600,000, or does that only apply for 2020 recipients to apply for after 3 years? Are we going for $600,000 or writing a new application?
Yeah, that only applies for, as of right now, that only applies for applicants that are submitting an application in 20. So for the person who asked that question, you would just be submitting an application for a new award.
Great. Thank you, James. And for clarification, the 24-month additional non-competitive funding is for OVW fiscal year 2020 only, or can it be applied for current OVW?
As of right now, it's going to start in 20. That's not to say that we might not change our mind later, but just going on what I know and what it is right now, it's starting with the applicants who get awarded in 20.
Great. Thank you, James. And if we are not able to get the tribal resolution prior to the due date because meetings are quarterly and a letter is a letter from the tribal chairman sufficient?
We would need the resolution, but I'll say it this way, and hopefully you can read between the lines. I would not let not having that stop me from submitting my application. And I'll say that again. Don't let that stop you from submitting your application. Try everything that you can do to get it in with your application. But for some reason, if not, you get it after you submit it, or what have you. That's one of those kind of things that we would take. But I don't want you to take that as a way to say, oh, let's not try to get it beforehand, or let's just wait to. No, you should start. If you know you're going to apply and you know you fit the situation in which a resolution is needed, you should be working on that as of like yesterday. I also don't want you, again, I don't want you to be discouraged if you, for some reason, based on your meeting schedule, you cannot just submit something with your application saying that, but don't let it stop you from submitting your application. Still submit an application without it if you absolutely have to.
Thank you, James. And can we apply for purpose area number 5 again, even though we are on our second year?
What year is the award that they currently have? They're saying they're on their second year, so I'm assuming maybe they applied in 18 maybe. And if they did apply in 18, then they're technically not eligible. But I would just need to, in order to answer that specific question, I would need to know the exact year of their award. So if that person wants to email me separately and we can talk about their issue offline, I'd be happy to do that.
Excellent. Thank you, James.
Mm-hmm.
And is it allowable to provide direct victim services to children ages 0 to 12?
You said direct victim services?
That's correct.
Is that the question? Surface level, I'm going to say yes, but I would need to see exactly what you're envisioning and what those services are. But surface level, yes. But, with the caveat that we need to see exactly what you're thinking and what you're lining out in terms of, services, just to make sure that, we're in agreement, they're allowable and all that good stuff. But surface level, yes.
Great.
There's a brief description on page 23 of the children and youth services that we're looking at under tribal government funding. That includes prevention strategies, bystander intervention, peer-to-peer education, parent and guardian education, home visitation, mental health services, educational support, and transportation. Those are the types of things that we're looking at for children and youth services.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca and James. We have another question that on page 10, it says that continuation grantees may send new staff to the new grantee orientation. Does this mean if we already attended the new grantee orientation during our grant term before we were granted the continuation grant, we do not need to attend?
I recognize that may seem a little confusing, but so how continuation works essentially is, in essence, you're continuing a previous project or a project that is about to end, and so you're applying as a continuation grantee. The thought is that really everyone that is doing something with the grant or spending a lot of time on it, whether it's a project coordinator, it's a finance person, even, advocates to a certain degree should probably attend. And I say that because, so office policies and things that are required by the office sometimes change from year to year. So let's just say you got awarded in 2016 and you're applying in 20 to continue that project. It's been enough time where we would want you to come to a new orientation, even though the funding is being added on to what you have left or what have you. You should be at the new grantee orientation. Certainly we understand sometimes grantees have conflicts. And so if it's a matter of someone who's been working on the award since it got awarded in 2016, and you have 3 other people that have just come on within the last year or so, or, within the last few months, I would think that if that person that's been there forever can't come, it's certainly, it's more important that the newer folks are there that haven't gotten a sense of anything. But, if everyone can come, we would want you there because enough time has passed by since your original award to this continuation award where some things might have changed. And we always want you to be in the best position to be able to implement your award and your grant correctly. And so attending new grantee orientation is a way to make sure that happens.
Great. Thank you, James. And we have a follow-up regarding the Batterers Intervention Program. And there was some confusion that individuals are looking to see for the program, what does it address? Because it seems to focus on the batterers and not the victims. So they're looking to get a little more clarification on what the program does and who it would be for.
It would be, okay, so that we would be looking at the 3rd bullet, if you're looking at the statutory project areas, to strengthen the tribal justice interventions, including tribal law enforcement, prosecution, courts, probation, and correctional facilities. That's the project area that Batterers Intervention Programs come under. It is for the courts to hold batterers accountable, which is like half of the OVW mission, right? Is to increase the services for victims and hold batterers accountable. So this is the hold batterers accountable piece. Does that make more sense?
Thank you, Rebecca. And there was also a follow-up for more clarification on the law enforcement questions as they are related to public safety officers versus a BIA or tribal police officer or bailiff. And can you give more examples of how prevention, investigation, and dedication to the 5 crimes helps? For example, could they be used to provide security for the Safe Child Visitation Center or the domestic violence shelter?
Rebecca, did you want to tackle or you want me to?
Okay, I don't know that you would want law enforcement officers doing supervised visitation. That's a pretty specific. That's a pretty specific activity, and I don't know that you want your law enforcement officers doing that. Dedicating the officer positions to these crimes, it's more about the investigation, making sure that there's follow-up with domestic violence victims, and that their reports are handled well, that the sexual assault reports are followed up on, that the rape kits make it down to the crime lab and get submitted to the crime lab for testing, doing follow-up interviews with the victims, doing coordinated community response or multidisciplinary team coordination, those types of things where you are specifically dedicating an officer's time to developing the tribal government response to our 5 crimes, and then also responding to the victims of those crimes. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. And we did get a follow-up from those who asked those questions, and they did say thank you for those clarifications. James, Rebecca, or Michael, do you have additional information that you would like to share or comments or tips?
Sure. I want to refer everyone to something new that we created this year. It's called an application quick start guide. Think of it as sort of like the Cliff Notes version of the solicitation. It's 13 pages, and it basically walks you through how you would apply and what you need, and it puts it in a very simple format, and it puts everything kind of in an easier place. Although it's pretty easy in the solicitation too, it kind of pulls out the key, very important things needed to submit an application. We kind of condense it down to 13 pages and simplify it for you to be able to find that information. I encourage you to look at that. I also remind you that the templates are absolutely required this year. That means the documents that are in GMS, that would be the purpose area narrative template for each respective purpose area in which you're applying for, the tribal community and justice profile template, and I'm missing the last one, the application. So there's an application cover sheet template. That is where you're going to be putting an abstract that is required. We have laid out very specific examples for if you're applying for OVW Purpose Area 5 versus if you're applying to other purpose areas. We have used language in which you basically just need to plug in information. We ask and require that you do that. Simply just don't put erroneous information that's really not an abstract or a description of what you're trying to do in there. We've put the language in there because we need very specific information as we're reviewing your application. That's true of OVW as well as true of the other offices. And it's actually really easy for you if you follow what we've given there, because you just be plugging in key pieces of information. So I make sure that you look at those templates and that you actually use the templates. The same with the timeline. If you are not, say if you're just applying the purpose area 1, 5, and 6, you can delete the references for the other purpose areas, but leave the references in for purpose area 5, purpose area 6, purpose area 1, and put in whatever you need to put in for the timeline. If it increases the amount of pages, that's fine. We don't care about that. We just want it all to be in that continuous document. Just make sure you're doing that. Make sure you pay attention to the dates when we close, again, February 25th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If by chance you do run into some technical issues or inclement weather, we've laid out very clearly in the solicitation what you are to do. Make sure that you do that. If you run into that situation, you will probably get very clear instructions from myself or Patricia Thaxton. Please make sure that you follow those. Don't wait till the last minute to do your application. Start now if you haven't started already. Really, you should be using your last 2 weeks to kind of proofread, check in, pull all the parties together that have worked on the application. If you have one person doing the budget, one person doing the purpose area narrative, you folks should talk with each other. Make sure that your applications are in sync. Make sure that you are submitting final versions of your application and not draft versions that include track changes and comments, because I am telling you, if you submit that, there's nothing we can do about it. It has to move forward in that way. Otherwise, we would be accused of giving an applicant an unfair advantage over someone else or altering an application, which we are not allowed to do. So triple check, triple check, triple check, triple check. Those mistakes are often made when you are rushing and waiting to the last day to submit your application and you have 10 minutes left and you're trying to get everything submitted. Spare yourself that headache and that disappointment by doing things early. Also, last year we built in the system where you will not be able to submit your application if key documents that are required are not in there. For example, an application is considered it's considered complete when you read through and get everything that's required, but especially if you have, when you submit your tribal community and justice profile, your budget and your budget to include your budget narrative, and if you're applying to COPS, that would also be the demographic form, but the demographic form is only required for COPS, and then also a purpose area narrative for each purpose area in which you're applying. So if you don't include those things, you will not be able to submit. However, there are some caveats to that. If you're applying the purpose area 5 and 6 and 1, there needs to be a purpose area narrative in there for each one of those, and the system will recognize that there should be 3 purpose area narratives. However, the system will not recognize what the actual document is. So if you upload your budget into the purpose area narrative page and you upload that 3 times, and then for your tribal community and justice profile, you upload someone's resume, and then for your budget, you upload, a document that discloses your pending applications, the system is not going to recognize what those documents are, so it will let you move forward. It's only going to recognize that you put something in those space. So you still have to triple check that you're submitting the correct document that you want to submit. Also, file names. Please use the names that we use in the solicitation for documents that you're submitting, or something where it would be very easy for us to tell what you're talking about. Oftentimes we have to go in and check to see if you submitted something, and if it's not, it makes it very easy on us if the names are what we gave them. So just make sure that you're using the appropriate names. Also in the solicitation, we list all acceptable file types. Please make sure that you're using one of those. I'm trying to think what else. If by chance you have to submit your application late and we follow up with you the next day, it is very important that you're being timely in your responses. If we ask for something at a certain time, we need it in a certain time. The point is to work with you to, help you to put your mind at ease that we're working with you to get your late application submitted, but it is not additional time to be starting an application that you haven't started already. So in short, what I'm saying is if I or someone else reach out to you and say, hey, we got your email that your application submitted late, that you couldn't get this one document submitted, when I email you, you should have that document readily available. It shouldn't be anything that you're working on. Please make sure that you're doing your applications early and on time. Make sure that you're registered with SAMS, that you have a DUNS number. All those kind of basic things that are needed are done. If you are applying on behalf of a tribe, please make sure that you are in the process of getting your resolutions done. Be very clear when you reach out to us about what the issue is. If it's regarding a particular purpose area, state that purpose area and the subject. Be sure that we have your full name, your phone number, your email address, everything that we need, complete contact information to be able to reach out to you. And I'm only restating things that seem to be a problem every year. So I'm just trying to alleviate that by letting you know those things up front. Again, if you're a current grantee, please check your spending and how much money you have down and keep that in mind in regards to the requirements that we have regarding that. I'm trying to think anything else to think about.
And James, we do have a few more questions.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. So in one of the slides early on in the presentation, it said new in 2020 for tribal governments Program Purpose Area 4. There was a note that funding will be available from OVC in fiscal year 2020 for victim services. Can you explain a little bit more on this?
So I can't speak specifically to their funding. They'll be coming out with something. But I do want to clarify that we're not telling you that you can't apply for victim services under here. We just think you would be better off directing the majority of that under OVC's funding when that becomes available. They will put out a solicitation on their website. There'll be all kinds of press about it, news releases. I don't know when that is yet. But I say that to say, again, to encourage you to focus your request for more of the things that are allowable that you can do under our funding and save the huge victim services piece for OVC. But again, that's not to discourage you from not submitting that under us. We're just trying to help you be more strategic and maximizing your funding for your community and what you're asking for and what you're using that for.
Thank you, James. And for the tribal governments program and the semi-annual reporting template, will that be updated to allow for data entry into the age of 0 to 12 data field? The current format prohibits data entry into this field.
I know that's something that they're looking at working on. I will have to follow up with our person that handles progress reports in the office, but I do know that that was raised on a list of questions and concerns, and so I'll follow up on that. Hopefully it will be, but there is always a way to write in additional information on the progress report. And then you can also submit, there's been times where grantees wanted to share things with us that may not have fit perfectly into the progress report. So they submitted their progress report, but in that progress report alluded to like a supplemental Word document that they wanted us to look at and review. That's always an alternative option, but I will follow up to see if we can get that addressed.
Yeah, there's several things that we need addressed on the tribal government's reporting form, and they are working on it. You can't gather data about services to sex
Yeah.
trafficking survivors. And that's one of our 5 crimes. So there are several things that is in the works for that reporting form. It's just we're not there yet.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca and James. Does Michael, James, or Rebecca have additional tips they'd like to share?
Nothing from me. I'm good.
Yeah, from my end, just make sure pre-awards read every question, be as detailed as possible in the budget in regards to computation and narrative. Make sure that the information that's in the budget matches also the project narrative. I'm trying to think anything else, anything related to the budget. If there's supportive documentation for that, you want to include it. Like I said, the indirect cost rate agreement, or you have a cost allocation plan, or you want to include that. And please ensure that, like James said, whoever is the point of contact for the budget, please ensure that you let us know if that person either left or it changes, because when we do, we have to go based on the information that is provided to us when we have questions on the budget. And if we cannot find anybody, like James said earlier, it will delay the process, and it makes it a lot more difficult to get things moving when we can't get a hold of anybody. I'm trying to think of anything else budget related. Yeah, I think that's about it on my end.
And Michael, we just did receive a question on the budget, and that was, where can I get the budget template?
James, can you answer that one? Is it all together in the solicitation, the links to the template as well as everything else, correct?
Oh, so you can email tribalgrants@usdoj.gov, or you can ask me for it, or if you're already registered with GMS, you can go into the GMS test site where it has all the documents you'd actually be using to submit. You can just download it from there to your computer.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, Michael, did you have any other tips or information that you would like to share? I kind of interrupted with that question in there.
Oh, no, you're fine. No, that's it. If they have any questions, like James said, just contact the tribal.grants or himself, and he can forward it over to us if it's a financial question, and then we can follow back up.
Great, thank you. And Rebecca, did you have any tips or additional information you would like to share?
Yes, thank you. I highly recommend paying attention to going onto the OVW website, to the resources for applicants page, and read through the solicitation companion guide. There is a lot of information in there that will be helpful to you, but this has all been gathered together to try to assist you in developing your projects. I promise you, we don't just put information out there for no apparent reason. All of this stuff has been looked over by many people from many different perspectives, so including our GFMD, including our attorney advisors, our grants program specialists, and other people that have a hand in walking these applications through the awards process and what we need to see in the applications in order for them to be funded, and then for them to remain in compliance throughout the award cycle should they be funded. So I do encourage you to take a look at that companion guide, and then pay particular attention to the activities that may compromise victim safety or undermine offender accountability. With this program, because the tribal governments program is funded under set-asides from several different funding streams, then it jumps around some. So if you have questions on what specific activities that compromise victim safety or undermine offender accountability apply to this grant program, either reach out to your current grant program specialist or James through the questions email address, and then we'll get back to you on those, because these are things that you can be marked down on during peer review, or if there are any of these activities included in your application, it could just not be funded, period. So you'll want to make sure that you're not including any of those activities in your proposed project.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. And there was a request to please repeat what to pay attention for on the comprehensive victim safety, and they missed the last part.
It's the activities that compromise victim safety and recovery and undermine offender accountability. And that's going to be in the solicitation companion guide on the OVW website.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great afternoon.